My mother told me she had sold my grandfather's house at Christmas dinner with a smirk. Not a subtle smirk. Not the kind that could be attributed to the wine or the candlelight or the particular looseness that Christmas dinners produce in people who have had enough of both. A deliberate smirk, the kind that arrives on a person's face when they have been waiting to say something and have chosen the moment carefully and are enjoying the arrival of it. She put down her fork. She looked at me across the table. She said, "We finally sold Grandpa's house. We got a very good price." Then she picked up her fork again and continued eating as though she had mentioned nothing more significant than the weather. I picked up my wine glass. I took a sip. I looked at her over the rim of the glass and I said, "I know." She looked up from her plate. The smirk shifted into something else, something between confusion and the beginning of alarm, the particular expression of a person who has delivered what they believed was a surprise and has received a response that does not fit the shape of a surprise. She said, "What do you mean you know?" I set my glass down carefully. I looked at the candles on the table and then back at her. I said, "I mean I know. I bought it back 3 months ago. The family that sold it to you needed to move quickly and I made them a fair offer and they accepted. I have been paying the mortgage on Grandpa's house since September." The table went very quiet. "My name is Natasha. I am 31 years old. What I am going to tell you now is the story of my grandfather's house and what my mother did with it and what I did about it, and the Christmas dinner where the smirk that was supposed to end the story turned out to be the moment the story finally began. But before the dinner I need to tell you about my grandfather and about the house and about what my mother had always believed about both of them. The grandfather. My grandfather's name was Robert and he had lived in the same house for 43 years. Not a grand house. A solid, careful house on a tree-lined street in a neighborhood that had changed around it across 4 decades while the house itself had remained constant, maintained with the particular attention of a man who understood that the things worth keeping required consistent effort and that consistent effort was its own kind of love. I had spent every summer of my childhood in that house. Not visiting, not passing through, living there from June to August while my mother worked and my grandfather and I developed the particular rhythm of two people who suit each other well and have the time and space to discover it fully. He taught me to cook in that kitchen, the same 4 dishes his own mother had taught him, on the understanding that knowing how to feed yourself and the people you love was a fundamental skill rather than an optional one. He walked with me through the neighborhood every evening after dinner, pointing out buildings and telling me their histories, the particular history of each block, who had lived there and what had happened and how the street had looked 40 years earlier when he had first arrived. I knew that house the way I knew very few things in my life. In the specific cellular way of a place that has shaped you during the years when shaping is still possible. My grandfather passed away when I was 26. He left the house to my mother, his daughter, which was the expected and legally straightforward outcome of a will that had been prepared without the kind of specific provisions that would have directed it elsewhere. I did not expect him to leave it to me. What I had hoped, without saying so explicitly because saying so would have required a conversation I did not know how to begin, was that my mother would understand what the house meant and would make decisions about it accordingly. My mother understood what the house meant. She simply did not consider what it meant to me to be relevant to the decisions she made about it. The selling. My mother sold the house 14 months after my grandfather's death. Not to a family who would live in it and maintain it with the care it had received for 43 years. To a developer who had been acquiring properties on that street for 2 years as part of a plan to demolish and redevelop the block. The sale price was good, which was the primary criterion my mother had applied to the decision, and the process had been handled quickly, which was the secondary criterion, and neither of these criteria had included any consideration of what the house represented or who else in the family might have had something to say about its disposition. She did not tell me she was selling it. She told me after the fact, in a phone call that lasted less than 4 minutes, with the brisk efficiency of someone delivering administrative information rather than news about something that matters. She said the sale had closed the previous week. She said the price had been very good. She said she thought it was the right decision. I asked why she had not told me it was happening. She said she had not wanted any unnecessary complications. I understood what unnecessary complications meant. It meant me. It meant the conversation she would have had to have if she had told me in advance, the conversation where I would have asked to be considered, where I might have asked whether I could buy it myself, where the decision would have become more complex than she wanted it to be. I said I understood. I ended the call. I sat for a long time in the particular silence of someone who has just lost something for the second time. Then I did what I do when I need to think clearly. I made tea and I opened my laptop and I started looking at property records. The purchase. The developer who had bought my grandfather's house was a company that specialized in acquiring and redeveloping residential properties in neighborhoods undergoing transition. They had purchased 4 properties on that street in the previous 2 years and my grandfather's house was the 5th. The redevelopment plan, which was a matter of public record because it required planning approvals, was scheduled to begin 18 months from the date of the most recent acquisition. Which meant the house was sitting empty. Which meant the developer owned a property they were not using for 18 months. Which meant there was a window. I am a financial analyst. I understand asset valuation and I understand negotiation and I understand that a developer holding an empty residential property for 18 months is carrying costs, insurance, maintenance, property taxes, all of which represent money going out with nothing coming in, and that a clean cash offer from a motivated buyer can look very attractive to someone in that position if the offer is structured correctly and presented at the right moment. I spent 6 weeks researching the developer, their financial position, their project pipeline, the specific economics of the redevelopment plan and what the timeline pressure looked like from their side. I built a valuation model that told me what the property was worth to them in the context of the redevelopment versus what it was worth to me as a standalone residential purchase. The gap between those two numbers was the space where a negotiation was possible. I made an offer in September. 3 months before Christmas dinner. I made it through a property lawyer who presented it on behalf of an unnamed buyer, which was a standard practice that I had used specifically because I did not want my mother to know what was happening until I had decided whether and when to tell her. The developer accepted after 2 rounds of negotiation. The price was fair and the closing was clean, and on a Thursday afternoon in October I signed documents that put my name on the deed of my grandfather's house. I stood outside the house afterward for a few minutes. It was October and the tree in the front garden that my grandfather had planted 30 years earlier was in the last of its autumn color and the house looked exactly as it had always looked, solid and careful and entirely itself. I did not go inside that day. I was not ready yet. I needed to sit with what I had done before I walked through the door, because walking through the door was going to be its own kind of thing and I wanted to be ready for it. I went home. I made the same tea my grandfather had made every evening after our neighborhood walks. I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about a man who had taught me to cook 4 dishes and had walked with me through a neighborhood every evening after dinner and had known, without saying so explicitly, that the things worth keeping required consistent effort. I was keeping it. Christmas was 3 months away. I did not tell anyone about the house between October and December. Not Priya, who was my closest friend and who knew most things about my life and who would have been, under ordinary circumstances, the first person I called after signing the documents. Not my father, who had died when I was 19 and whose absence was still, 12 years later, the specific shape of something that could not be filled but had been lived around until the living around it had become simply the shape of my life. Not any of the cousins or aunts or family members who would be at Christmas dinner and who would witness what was going to happen there. I kept it because keeping it felt right in a way that was difficult to articulate but easy to trust. I had spent most of my life in my mother's family being the person whose feelings and preferences and investments in things were considered secondary to the practical and financial decisions that the adults around her made without consultation. I had spent most of my adult life building something independent of that dynamic, building it carefully and without announcement, the way you build things when you have learned that announcement invites interference and that the most secure things are the ones that are complete before anyone has the opportunity to complicate them. The house was complete. The deed was signed. My name was on it. There was nothing my mother could do about it and there was nothing anyone at Christmas dinner could do about it, and the knowledge of that completeness was, across those 3 months, the most comfortable thing I had been carrying in a very long time. I went to the house twice in October and once in November. Not to do anything specific, not to begin renovating or cleaning or planning. Simply to be in it. To walk through the rooms the way I had walked through them every summer for the first 16 years of my life, with the particular attentiveness of someone who understands that a space has been shaped by the people who loved it and that some of that shaping is still present in the walls and the light and the particular way the kitchen smells in the morning. My grandfather's kitchen still smelled the same. I do not know how that was possible given that he had been gone for 5 years and the house had been empty for 14 months and then occupied by a developer who had not cooked anything in it. But it did. The specific combination of old wood and something I had never been able to name that had always meant his kitchen to me was still there, faint but present, the way certain things persist beyond what seems reasonable because the people who created them cared about them enough to make them permanent. I stood in that kitchen on a Saturday morning in November and I thought about what I was going to say at Christmas dinner. I did not plan it exactly. I have never been someone who rehearses the important conversations because rehearsal produces a version of yourself that is performing rather than present, and I wanted to be present for this particular conversation in the way that it deserved. What I did was think about what was true and what I wanted my mother to understand and what the most honest version of both of those things sounded like when they were said out loud. By December I knew what I was going to say. I was waiting for her to give me the moment to say it. She gave me the moment at Christmas dinner. The dinner. My mother's Christmas dinners were always well organized. She had a talent for the logistics of family gatherings, the seating and the food and the particular sequencing of courses that kept a table full of people moving through an evening at a comfortable pace, and I had always appreciated this about her even when I had found other things about her considerably harder to appreciate. The table that year had 11 people. My mother and her husband, 3 cousins with their partners, 2 aunts, and me. I was the only person at that table who knew about the house. Everyone else arrived carrying only the ordinary weight of a family Christmas, the small tensions and the genuine warmth and the particular mixture of both that characterizes most family gatherings when the people at the table have complicated histories with each other and have agreed, for one evening, to set most of the complications aside. I arrived with wine and a dessert I had made from one of my grandfather's recipes, the specific one he made every Christmas, the one that required 3 hours of preparation and that I had been making every December since he died because making it was the closest thing I had found to having him at the table. My mother noticed the dessert when I put it on the kitchen counter. She looked at it for a moment without saying anything. Then she said it looked lovely and moved on to the logistics of the evening. We ate. The food was good and the conversation was the ordinary conversation of a family Christmas, news about people and places and the small events of lives being lived in different cities and circumstances. I ate and listened and contributed when I had something to contribute and felt, across most of the meal, the particular piece of someone who is sitting inside a moment they have been waiting for and is comfortable enough in the waiting to simply be present in it. My mother put down her fork somewhere between the main course and the dessert. She looked across the table at me with the expression I had been waiting for, the one I had known was coming because I knew her and because she had been building toward it across the whole evening in the way that she built toward things she wanted to say, with a kind of suppressed anticipation that was visible if you knew where to look. She said, "We finally sold Grandpa's house. We got a very good price." She said it with the smirk. I picked up my wine glass. I took a sip. I looked at her over the rim and I said, "I know." The moment. The table did not go quiet immediately. It went quiet in stages, the way silence spreads through a group of people when something has been said that requires processing before the processing produces a response. My mother said, "What do you mean you know?" I put the glass down. I said, "I mean I know because I bought it back 3 months ago." The developer who purchased it from you had carrying costs and a timeline that made a clean offer attractive. I made the offer in September. The closing was in October. My name has been on the deed since the 3rd Thursday of October. My mother looked at me the way people look at something when their eyes are receiving information that their brain has not yet organized a response to. One of my cousins said, "Wait, which house?" I said Grandpa's house. The one on Elmwood Street. The one where I spent every summer for 16 years. The one with the tree in the front garden that Grandpa planted 30 years ago. That house. My cousin said, "Natasha owns Grandpa's house." I said, "Yes." The table processed this for a moment. My mother said, "You bought it without telling me." I said, "You sold it without telling me. I thought we were operating on the same principle." The silence that followed that sentence was different from the previous silences. It had a specific quality, the quality of a room full of people who have just heard something said out loud that has been true for a long time and has finally been named in the presence of everyone who needed to hear it named. My mother looked at the table. Then she looked at me. The smirk was entirely gone. What was there instead was something I had not seen on her face often, something that might have been the beginning of understanding or might have been something that would eventually become understanding if given enough time and enough quiet to develop properly. She said, "Why did you want it back?" I said, "Because it is where Grandpa taught me to cook. Because I know the way the kitchen smells in the morning. Because the tree in the front garden is 30 years old and he planted it and I am not going to let it be demolished by a developer who bought it from you without asking me whether I wanted it first." I reached into my bag. I put a copy of the deed on the table beside my mother's plate, the way my grandfather had put the document on the table at his anniversary party, not as a weapon but as evidence of something completed, something real, something that existed now regardless of anything else that was said at that table or any other table afterward. I said, "I am moving in February. I would like you to come for dinner when I am settled. I will make the Christmas recipe. I will make enough for everyone." My mother looked at the deed. She looked at the dessert on the kitchen counter, the one I had made from his recipe. She looked at me. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "He would have liked that." I said, "I know. We had dessert. It was the best thing on the table, which it always was, which it always will be, because he made it that way and I learned it from him, and some things persist beyond what seems reasonable because the people who created them cared about them enough to make them permanent." I moved into the house in February. The kitchen still smells the same. I think it always will. If someone sold something that was never really theirs to sell and you found a way to bring it home, leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Subscribe for the next one. This is Hidden Truth Revenge, where the truth always finds a way.